The still independent parts of Asia after 1750 suffered from political decline and the reactions of their cultures to new challenges. They also faced the threat of Western imperialism and the problems of dealing with the West's industrial lead. China under the Qing dynasty in the 17th century enjoyed growth and prosperity and had the power to limit European intervention. The Ottomans, on the contrary, were then in full retreat. Russia and Austria seized territories. North African province broke away, and local leaders throughout the empire became more independent. Economic and social disruption accompanied the political malaise. Although the Ottoman rulers did not have a solution to their problems, they regained some strength during the 19th century by following Western-style reforms. The Chinese entered a prolonged crisis period. At the end of the century, the foundations of Chinese civilization had been demolished by internal and external pressures. Western dominance and the decline of civilizations. Some general patterns have been associated with the decline of civilizations: internal weakness and external pressures, slow and vulnerable communication systems, ethnic, religious, and regional differences, corruption, and the pursuit of pleasure. Nomads took advantage of such weakness, but rarely did neighboring civilizations play a major role in the demise of another. The European rise to world dominance from the 18th century fundamentally changed the patterns of the rise and fall of civilizations. In the Americas, European military assaults and disease destroyed existing civilizations. African and Asian civilizations were able to withstand the early European arrival, but the latter's continued development by the end of the 18th century made them dominant. The subordinate civilizations reacted differently. Some retreated into an idealized past. Others absorbed ideas of their rulers. The various efforts at resistance did not all succeed. Some civilizations survived, others collapsed. From Empire to Nation, Ottoman Retreat and the Birth of Turkey. By the early 18th century, the Ottoman Empire was in decline. The weak rulers of the empire left the way open for power struggles between officials, religious experts, and janissary commanders. Provincial administrators and landholders colluded to drain revenue from the central treasury. The general economy suffered from competition with the West as imported goods ruined local industry. European revivals took advantage of Ottoman weakness. The Austrians pushed the Ottomans from Hungary and the northern Balkans. The strengthened Russian state expanded into the Caucasus and the Crimea. The subject Christian peoples of the Balkans changed their rulers. The Greeks won independence in 1830, Serbia in 1867. Reform and survival. The Ottomans survived the continuing defeats partly because the European powers feared the consequences of territorial division among the victors. The British propped up the Ottomans during the later 19th century to prevent Russians from reaching the Mediterranean. The weakened empire was preserved by internal reform. Selim III's modest military and administrative reform attempts angered officials and the janissaries. He was deposed and killed in 1807. Mahmud II was more successful. With the help of European advisors, he built a professional army that destroyed the janissaries in 1826. Mahmud II then launched far-reaching reforms patterned on Western models. Between 1839 and 1876, the period of the Tanzimat reforms, university education was reorganized on Western lines, postal and telegraph systems were introduced, and railways constructed. Newspapers were established, and in 1876, a European-style constitution was promulgated. The many changes opened the empire to Europeans and threatened some groups. Artisans lost out to the foreign competition. Women gained little from the reforms, as Islamic patterns changed and continued. Repression and revolt. The reforms strengthened the state, but they threatened the dynasty. Western-orientated officials, military officers, and professionals viewed the Sultanate as a barrier to more reform. They also clashed with the conservative ulama and Ayan. Sultan Abdul Hamid, 1878 to 1908, responded by trying to return to despotic military and educational reform, and railway and telegraph construction. Abdul Hamid's harsh rule ended in 1908 when he was removed by the Young Turks, reformers, including military officers who wanted to continue Western-style reforms. The constitution and civil liberties were restored in a regime directed by a figurehead sultan. Factional fights among the reformers hampered their efforts, while fighting in the Balkans and North Africa lost territory. The Arabs under Ottoman rule began to seek their independence. The empire survived, but in a much weakened condition, until Turkish entry into World War I resulted in its dissolution. Western intrusions and the crisis in the Arabic-Islamic heartlands. The leaders and thinkers of the Islamic world were divided about how to reverse, decline, and drive back Europeans. They argued over a spectrum ranging from a return to the past to the adoption of Western ways. By the 19th century, the Arabs under the weakened Ottoman Empire were exposed to the danger of European conquest. The loss of Islamic territory to the Europeans engendered a sense of crisis in the Middle East. Muhammad Ali and the failure of Westernization in Egypt. Napoleon's victory over the Ottoman Mamluk vassals in Egypt destroyed the existing local power balance. The easy victory of the French demonstrated the vulnerability of Muslim regions before European power. When the British forced French withdrawal, an Albanian Ottoman officer, Muhammad Ali, emerged as Egypt's ruler by 1811. He introduced European military reforms and created a powerful army and navy that freed him from independence upon his nominal Ottoman overlord. Muhammad Ali also attempted, and with limited success, to modernize Egypt's economy through reforms in agriculture, infrastructure, education, and industry. To keep Egypt secure, Muhammad Ali allied with the powerful rural landlords, Ayyan, to control the peasantry. The landlords resisted his reform efforts and remained a hereditary entrenched class. The peasants were impoverished by the state's continued demands. The limited scope of Muhammad Ali's reforms checked his plans for territorial expansion and left Egypt exposed to European threats. His successors confined their energies to Egypt and the Sudan. Bankruptcy, European intervention, and strategies of resistance. Muhammad Ali's less talented successors abandoned reform and allowed the Ayyan to profit at the expense of the peasantry. Egypt became dependent on the export of a single crop, cotton. State revenues were spent on extravagant pastimes and military campaigns in the Sudan. The regime and the elite became indebted to European creditors. The Europeans invested in the building of the Suez Canal, which opened in 1869. Muslim intellectuals and political activists looked for ways to protect Egypt from its inept rulers. The ancient University of Al-Azhar became a focal center for Muslims in many lands. Some of the thinkers looked to the past, but others, such as Al-Afghani and Muhammad Abdul, stressed the need for Muslims to adopt Western science and technology. They emphasized the importance of the tradition of rational inquiry in Islamic history and contested conservative views that the single source of truth was found in a literal interpretation of the Quran. The persisting difference between the rival interpretations damaged Muslim ability to meet the European threat. The growing European foreign debt and the strategic importance of the Suez Canal stimulated British and French thoughts of intervention. When Army officer Ahmad Arabi led a revolt against the Khedive in 1882, the British intervened to save the ruler. British consuls thereafter directed the Egyptian government through puppet Khedives. Jihad, the Mahdist revolt in the Sudan. The British were drawn into the disorder in the Sudan. Egyptian efforts at conquest from the 1820s had won only an insecure hold over fertile lands along the Nile and the towns such as Khartoum. Camel nomads resisted their authority. The corrupt Egyptian regime oppressed sedentary farmers and alienated all classes by trying, in the 1870s under British influence, to end the slave trade. The Muslims of the northern Sudan found a leader in Muhammad Ahmad, a religious figure known as the Mahdi. He proclaimed a jihad against the Egyptians and British that would return Islam to its original purity. The Mahdi won control of the Sudan. After his death, the movement continued under the capable Khalifa Abdallahi. The Mahdists built a strong state with a society closely regulated by strict Islamic norms. The British ended this threat to European domination when General Kitchener crushed the Mahdist forces at Omdurman in 1896. Abd-Ali was killed and the state disintegrated. Retreat and anxiety. Islam imperiled. The world of Islam suffered serious reverses during the 19th century. All efforts, from reform to resistance, did not halt the European advance. Local economies became dependent upon European products and demands. As the century closed, Islam, still divided over the explanation for its decline, was seriously threatened by the European rulers of most of the world.